My name is Holly M. Crawford, and I am the Director of Adult Public Programs at LACMA. Welcome and thank you for joining us today. I'm honored to present this lecture series, Rethinking Conquest, which is presented in conjunction with two exhibitions now on view at LACMA. Mixpantli, Space, Time, and the Indigenous Origins of Mexico, and Mixpantli, Contemporary Echoes. I have an installation view in my backdrop and highly recommend seeing these works in person. The exhibitions are co-curated by Dr. Deanna Magaloni, the Deputy Director, Program Director, and the Dr. Virginia Fields Curator of the Art of the Ancient Americas, as well as the Suzanne D. Booth and David G. Booth Conservation Center Director at LACMA, and Elise de Carteret, the Mellon Postdoctoral Fellow in the Art of the Ancient Americas Department at LACMA. I'd like to invite Elise de Carteret to the virtual stage to provide an overview of the exhibitions and introduce this evening's presenter, Deanna Magaloni.
Thank you so much for the introduction, Holly. Both of the Mixpantli exhibitions were themselves conceived to rethink the traditional narrative of conquest, creating an opportunity on the 500th anniversary of the fall of the Aztec capital Tenochtitlan to center instead the creative resistance of indigenous artists. Their works, illustrated histories, featherworks, stone sculptures, and cartographic paintings, tell a story not of defeat, but of perseverance, renewal, and an enduring commitment to an indigenous future. One evocative example is what is known as the Florentine Codex, an illustrated encyclopedia of Nahua knowledge and history, written by Nahua scribes in the midst of an epidemic that killed 80% of central Mexico's indigenous population. The magnitude of their commitment to such an ambitious, world-sustaining project is something that I think we can perhaps better understand in these trying times. Today, Deanna Magaloni will tell us more about this encyclopedic manuscript, originally entitled Historia General de las Cosas de Nueva España, or the General History of the Things of New Spain. This program is part of a four-part lecture series providing an in-depth look at the Florentine Codex and indigenous histories of the conquest. Presenters include the scholars Deanna Magaloni, Angelica J. Afanador Pujol of ASU, Federico Navarrete of Mexico's UNAM, and Jeanette Peterson of UC Santa Barbara. I would now like to introduce Dr. Deanna Magaloni, our distinguished presenter and LACMA colleague. Dr. Deanna Magaloni is a renowned art historian, author, curator, and conservator. She is currently Deputy Director, Program Director of the Art of the Ancient Americas, and the Director of the Conservation Center at the Los Angeles County Museum of Art. Dr. Magaloni holds a Ph.D. in Art History from Yale University, an M.A. in Art History from the Universidad Nacional Autónoma de México, or UNAM, and a B.A. in Conservation from Mexico's Instituto Nacional de Antropología e Historia. Before coming to LACMA, she was director of the Museo Nacional de Antropología in Mexico City and a researcher and professor at UNAM. Her research has focused on developing methodologies to understand the originality of the artistic and aesthetic processes of ancient America's indigenous cultures. So without further ado, thank you once again for joining us, and please enjoy the program.
Thank you very much, Elise. I'm very, very happy to be with all of you. Thank you very much, Holly and Cello, who are there, and all the LACMA team that makes this possible. I'm very happy to present. Here we have it. So I'm going to start talking about this great encyclopedia. These are photographs of the pages of Book 1, that is devoted to the gods. Book 2, that is the ceremonies, the yearly ceremonies. They are called veintenas in Spanish because they are 18 feasts of 20 days that comprise the year. Then we have Book 3, the origins of the gods. It's all the mythology of creation of the gods and of the earth, the eras. It's a very interesting book. Book 4, it's the Divinatory Calendar, or the Tonal Powali. Tonali means this energy of life that it is given to you at birth, and the signs of that birth, the position of the sun during that time gives a particular characteristic. It's a little bit like the zodiac. The omens, it's a way to understand the signals that the natural world offers you to know the state of affairs, so of what could happen in the future. The rhetoric and philosophy in Nahuatl, it's the works of the Huehuetlatoli, the words of the ancient ones. It's all the knowledge that comprise how to relate to the other world, to the gods, how to relate to other persons around you, being the government, the lords, or being your parents or your children. And they are very, very dear to the Nahuatl. Book 7, which is an astronomical book that tries to understand the sky, the world, but also through a Ptolemaic astronomy, because it's 1575 when this starts to be painted, and all the European knowledge about astronomy, the Nahuatl combine with their own knowledge of the sky. Book 8, which is a history of the governors of many communities in central Mexico before the conquest. Book 9, it's about the present. It's about the new painters and the new scribes and the new plateros, the ones who like how the arts changed. And so everything there, it's written about the artists in New Spain, all indigenous. Book 10, the people, all the different kinds of people, not only in terms of their ethnicity, but in terms of their occupations. Book 11, which is a natural history. It's an amazing book with more than 400 images. Every single living being of New Spain, of these lands, is portraited there. And the last book, which is a history in itself, and it is not written as an encyclopedia with entries, is the Book of the Conquest. And I'm going to be talking about the Florentine Codex as the context for this particular book 12, because we're going to be talking about the Nahuatl of central Mexico, the Mexica, let's say, the Mexica way to write and understand what the Western calls the history of the conquest of Mexico. So here it is, the Florentine Codex. Look at it as a work of art with all of these texts coming together, the Nahuatl text, the Spanish text, and the visual text, all coming together and forming a whole together. It has 12 bilingual handwritten folios. That means that even if this book looks like a printed book, the indigenous scribes who wrote this did it by hand, and 2,000 folios would translate today into 4,000 pages, because each folio has a recto and a verso. And counting all the images, there are 2,686 colored drawings, all colored with care. So this is the work. This is what comprised this work of art, that is the Florentine Codex. The bicultural authorships, it's super important to take into account. Why? We have always called the Historia General the work of Bernardino de Sahagún. Everybody has cited Bernardino de Sahagún because he was the Franciscan who initiated this, who of course oversaw the project, planned it, but the methodology was to investigate the knowledge of all of these things that I've told you through questionnaires that he was giving to different peoples in central Mexico that would answer the questionnaire and would answer it in the way the pre-Columbian indigenous tradition writes, which is in paintings. So in order for him to translate those answers into alphabetic Nahuatl and then translate them into Spanish, The scholars, the Nahua scholars of the College of Santa Cruz Tlatelolco, portrayed here, were the ones who translated the images, the knowledge of those images, into written responses. And they wrote the Nahuatl column, that it's the most, that it's the original that at the same, that later was translated by Sahagún into Spanish. So that is why it's important to have this knowledge of the Florentine Codex being of bilingual authorship, bilingual and bicultural authorship. It's important to think of what are the categories that served Sahagún and served the Nahua painters to do this work. So for Sahagún, and also this was understood by the Nahua who since 1536, this is 75 again, were trained in the 7 liberal European arts: grammar, rhetoric, and logic, arithmetic, geometry, astronomy, music, theology. This was how you would have studied the rational arts. And painting for Sahagún and for the other Europeans at that moment was not a rational art, was a mechanical art. So that is why the paintings in Sahagún's and the European view didn't pose any threat. Instead, for the Nahua, the word painting, that it's in Tlili, in Tlapali, the tradition of painting history, that for us would be writing history or creating knowledge. It's called Intlili. Intlili means the black ink or the black, and Intlapali, which is translated as the red ink or the red or the colors. Just like in Spanish, color y colores, no? Colorado, colores are the same as with Tlapali, that can mean red and all the colors. So imagine the black and the red, the black and the colors is the metaphorical word to refer to keeping and creating knowledge. So for the Nahua, even if they are painting with a seemingly Europeanized style, those paintings continue to have that symbolism. They were creating knowledge. So while this is happening, they are in book 11, when Sahagún shifts in his translation from the third person describing the roads into the first person, saying that in the year 1576, so they had started in late 1575, in the month of August, a great universal pestilence began. And the 3 months that he had been seeing this pestilence in Mexico City, in Tlatelolco, where they were doing the Florentine Codex, that day, November 8th, he was seeing that every day more than 80% died. And they were dying from hunger and thirst because no one could attend to them, because a whole household will get sick. This pestilence ended up killing by 79, 80 to 90%, depending on the statistics, of the indigenous population of central Mexico. So whoever stayed in the College of Santa Cruz to paint decided that finishing the Florentine Codex was the way for their culture and themselves to survive into the future. They made that decision. And if you see the paintings in book 11, right before this statement, you see the delicacy of these images, the care that every single painter put into creating them. You see this Pecari stepping out of the frame, really playing with the observer, telling you, I am a realistic figure, but at the same time, I am a representation. I am in this frame. It has, like in Europe, this linear perspective with colors, with the mountains in blue in the back, just as the coyote is like that. And it also brings the tradition of Mesoamerican painting, like in these magical fish with the water and the papalomichi, that it's the fish butterfly, and the ocelomichi, the fish ocelotl or jaguar. So while they are doing these, just remember that everything around them is crumbling. So I wanted to understand the paintings and the care that it was put into them. And one part of it is to study the colors on how to make them. And many of the colors are transparent colorants where you paint, and if you want to make any correction, it's impossible to make a correction because it's completely translucent. And the light coming from the paper really illuminates the works. But there are also other pigments that are mineral pigments or artificial Mesoamerican pigments like the Maya blue and the Maya green, and one single European pigment that it's the minium, that color, that have covering power and therefore can cover the surface. As you can see in the image with the green, the feathers were first drawn in black, and when the painter painted on top with Maya green, he covered those lines. That is how thick and covering this pigment is. And to understand the making of these colors, there's in book 11 a treatise on how to create all the colors. And here it is, the cochineal and the matlali. They paint the source where the plant grows, and then they paint how it is processed and how it is used. Every single image with a different painter, each one with different features. So I interpret these as the painters portraying themselves. In order to fully understand it, I did this study where we reconstructed the making of these pigments. And we have cochineal with many different subtleties depending on the pH. You can create this magenta, this purple, but the typical red or more an orangey tone, depending on the pH. Then we analyzed with X-ray fluorescence and FTIR the images. This is a non-destructive method, thanks to the Biblioteca Medicea Laurenziana, where the codex is, and to the team of Italian scientists at the University of Florence, led by Piero Baglioni, with instrumentation by Brucker. And one of the characteristics that it's very, very important to notice, especially in some colors like the red, is that this small little flower in the Tonalpowali is painted with two different reds. One red that is cochineal, and the other red on top, which is cinnabar. Why would you need to paint in that moment with such detail two reds? This is almost invisible to the naked eye, but it is important symbolically. As anthropologists and historians of the Mesoamerican past have bring forth, and this continues to be part of the reality of many indigenous, of the indigenous lore of many communities. The world is created by two forces. Anything that exists is created by two forces: the dark, watery, telluric forces of the underworld, where the stars and the moon shine. No, it's also the night and the caves. That energy is this dark feminine energy. and the hot masculine upper world of during the day, where the sun illuminates everything with colors. So if you think of these two forces that create everything, you would know that this flower has that power of creation. It's a complete being. It has through cochineal that grows thanks to the power of the sun and absorbs the sunlight, that energy of solar power, and through the cinnabar that you come and get from the entrails of the earth, that other dark force. So this sign in the Tonalpowali, it's a sign that completes the whole cycle of creation, of the two energies of creation. Here the moon, for instance, it's done with all the pigments that would make the moon really be this shining star, let's say, put it that way, of the underworld, the prince of the underworld. It has gypsum that it's according to the Florentine Codex obtained from the lake. You would go, and at the bottom of the lake you would have that layer of white clay that then you dry and process with fire. Then you have Maya blue, that it's a beautiful pigment that, as the flower comprises everything. It has the indigo, that it's a dye from leaves that grow with the sun, that it is processed into a very dark blue. And then that blue from the plant is fixed on a clay that it's again from the earth, and that creates the Maya blue. Then this mineral brown, that it's a manganese and iron and cinnabar, and of course the white of the paper. So here the moon is, through the pigments, it's becoming the energy of the moon. Then you have this Maya blue and the Maya green creating the preciousness, just like the precious clock capa of Moctezuma, that it's made with feathers and turquoise. This feather, quetzal feather penacho that it's in the Museo de Antropología, just by putting light on it, you see how it is, these feathers symbolize the change, the living light of the feathers that are blue and green at the same time. So this is the color of preciousness, again, because of that light in itself and its two colors, it has that ability of creation. You can see, for instance, here in book 12, how the painter used a red that is pre-Columbian with at the rim of the cape of this first figure, that it's Cuauhtzin, the lord of Tlatelolco, who has been killed and is being thrown into the Great Canal by the Spaniards. And instead the Spaniard is it's colored with minium, that European pigment, minium. And you see Moctezuma, who now has lost the Maya blue, and the indigo is still there, but without that brilliance, and he has lost that tonali of royal power, that force, that light in itself, and it's becoming just like the watery underworld, dark and dim. So colors paint and tell a story in and of themselves, in the midst of the painters surviving a pandemic much worse than the one we are surviving. And so that is the context in which the last book of all the books was created. This book, the 12º libro, que trata de cómo los españoles conquistaron a la Ciudad de México, has an amazing, amazing, complex story. So on the one hand is Lockhart, who is a Nahuatl expert who studied and translated this book, clearly identifies idiomatic ways of writing the Nahuatl that are very traditional and ancient. So he considered those parts, certain parts of this book, to be really the conquest as experienced by those who are fighting, who must have created a version of an epic chant that was preserved. Then the conquest remembered and interpreted 70 years later, 50 years later, by the second generation, who is reading these texts and bringing them into their present. They are already 75, already 50 years in the colonial rule, and they are interpreting that conquest from that standpoint. And then this conquest translated, in a sense, justified, explained by Sahagún, who in his translation to Spanish changes many things of the Nahua version. Not enough to really mimic the Western versions of the conquest, but enough to really know that there were very important things that the Nahua were saying about the conquest that were almost heretical for the European view. And in fact, this book it costs a lot to Sahagún. He wrote a book in 85, repenting of this book and really writing a story that follow closely the European version instead of the indigenous version. So to have this book in our hands, it's a miracle. It's fantastic. It was really persecuted. The Inquisition wanted to erase anything written in Nahuatl or any indigenous language by 1577 because there was a royal edict stating that, and the Florentine Codex was pointed at as needed to be seized. So the fact that it went to Europe, we don't know exactly how, and that it was saved in the Medici library, in the Biblioteca Medicea Lorenziana, it's really a testament to almost destiny. This book and their creators gave their lives for it to survive. So we need to really pay close attention to what they inherited us. The paintings, I think the paintings are very, very important because the texts, of course, can be read by Sahagún, by the crown. The text has to be very careful, has to be very metaphorical in order to state certain things. But the paintings are thought as mere illustrations. So in there, the constitution of the Intlili Intlapali provides a view, an ulterior view of how the conquest was interpreted and conceived. Almost the paintings paint an ulterior explanation in the framework of the Mesoamerican mind that can be interpreted today. The painting transformed, therefore, the alphabetic text into Tlahtoli. Tlahtoli means the powerful, meaningful words of Mesoamerica, the oral tradition. So together, those texts written in alphabetic Nahuatl become something else. The text becomes Tlahtoli. And the paintings are Ixiptla. It's a very important concept here that I want you to think about. We call image an image, a representation. You know that you are copying reality and that what you're painting is actually an abstraction of what is out there or what is inside you. It can be the expression of something. But for the Nahua who were painting, paintings were Ixiptla. That means an incarnation, a presence, a living presence of someone. It's almost like they are not representing, but presenting, creating a presence. So in order to do that, the materials need to be meaningful, because if Shipla is made become apparent, become alive, to make appear through the paintings, the Intlili Intlapali. So this is all that those paintings have to say. Then there's paintings as a word to record and illustrate history, that it's the eyewitness testimony that these painters will be using, and they are taking this from the European idea that the eyewitness testimony is the most powerful and in history, and that the painting style and draftmanship, that it's very much into Europe, in the style of European Renaissance. It's a proof of their rational capabilities, and that started very early. As early as the Mendicant order started to give engravings to copy, etc., they were sending them to Europe saying, you see, all these Indians are rational because they can paint. So they are a proof of their rational capabilities. That is why this style in this book is so important, because they also telling their version of who they are and what the conquest is to the King of Spain. So all of those complexities are in this book. And the paintings as the product of vision, of divination, linked to the sacred books. This is a Mesoamerican tradition, but it also relates to the Bible, because, for instance, St. John in Patmos had these visions, and that is why in the Bibles what was illustrated was first and foremost the Apocalypse. And since they were living this apocalyptic reality, the book of Revelation, it's a lot presence in a second reading, in a Christian reading of this painting. So just so you to bear in mind while we start analyzing this. So I'm going to start with the chapters that are the first chapter, that tell the meeting of the two different groups that will fight. So it is the meeting of 5 Mexica representative of Moctezuma, his ambassadors in the Gulf Coast, and they see the boats and Cortés. So these are the images. Here you have what is happening. It is chapter 5. The emissaries bring all these gifts to Moctezuma. They are the gifts that are the attire of 5 different deities, important deities in Mesoamerica. They gave him a mosaic turquoise mask, a feather head fan, green stone, serpent earplugs. All of this is described with great care. And there are 5 different gods that could wear these very important, meaningful instruments. And here it is. Let's analyze each of these images. So we have the 2 groups. These are the 5 noble emissaries of Moctezuma, giving the arrays of the gods that Moctezuma is sending them. That I have to say, it is not a submissive attitude. It's a grand attitude, because one, they are thinking that these powerful people needed to be investigated. So if they dress them with the images of their gods, they can manage their gods. It's a way to investigate who these are. On the other hand, so this is a frame of a worldview that is very different from Cortés, who is already seated in this silla de caderas, this chair that becomes the symbol of the Spanish crown. And then he will always pair with Marina. He calls her Marina, Malintzin in Nahuatl, and then later called Malinche, who translates for him not only language, but culture. And really it's a very important intelligence for the conquest, an intelligent woman who knows how to deal with both worlds. And then the Spanish Armada always there. So here it is, the chair that has become iconic. And I am showing you this just to show you how these images work. There are certain things that become iconic that are symbolic of something else. So here what they are telling you is that he is the representative of King Charles V. Cortés is the Ixiptla of a king. And that king at the same time is the Ixiptla of whom? Of God. He is the representative of Christ. So all of this is present just with the chair and will be used and used and used in many other documents. Instead, for the pre-Columbians who are giving these gifts, what is in their minds is that if you array the gods, it's the way you create a god. And after you dress a god, you create, you worship that god, you sacrifice that god to use that force. In a sense, this is the reciprocity between the forces out there and humans. So giving those presents and arraying Cortés, it's in the same tradition, just as the traditions of creating the gods in the ventenas that I was explaining. This is the arraying of the Ixiptla, the representative of Tezcatlipoca. So just for you to understand what it means to array a god. When they are describing the gods in book 1, they are not telling you this god does this and it's powerful for that and moves quickly. No, it's only in the Spanish version. The Nahuatl version just describes how he was arrayed, because all of those elements is what make the god to become a god. It's a ritual. They are stages, there are ways to do things that end up creating the representative of a god. And that is why materiality is so important, because here you have the costly cape with precious feathers, the quetzal feather device, the way that he was painted on his face, the shield that was turquoise, every single thing has a meaning. And that is what Painal, that is the Ixiptla of the most powerful god Huitzilopochtli, he becomes that, only having all of these elements. So here it is, the image of the Ixiptla. This is a priest that has become a jaguar-like figure that it's that has this he has become this powerful being. So the Ixiptla, as López Austin says, is related to the notion of the Nahual that many of you have heard, and it's the capacity of a powerful individual to transform into another being and adopt the other's identity. Imagine if you could switch into the other's identity and see the world from that standpoint. So if you are fighting against a sickness because you become that sickness, you know how to cure that sickness. If you become a jaguar, you become as powerful as the jaguar and you can see at night. So this transformation is the way the shamanic tradition deals with power and deals with managing the forces of the universe. So this transformation is described as the vestments of the other, because the skin, shapely, no, the skin, it is the covering is what relates to that power. So just to more deeply understand this concept, Viveiros de Castro, who studied this in the Amazons today, says that the difference between beings is expressed and defined by means of the body and the attire. So it is not so much that the body is a kind of clothing, but that the clothing is a type of body. So this little boy, Macau, is actually a Macau. He's not disguised as a Macau. He has become a Macau. And this is the training that Amerindians have since very early. They can become the other. So in becoming the other, also for conquest, imagine understanding who is Cortés through converting him into one of the forces that you can tame or manage. That is something that it's very important. Or having the images of the conquest become as the images of the European engraving, it's for the painters to be powerful painters because they understand that language. So it's very, very important, the shape and the skin that are the colors. So here we continue. So what happens? Once they give him the presents, Cortés reacts and says that all of these gifts are nothing to him, that why are they approaching him with these stupid things almost? And in that moment, he commands his soldiers to put them in bounds with irons in their ankles and necks. So they are completely flabbergasted, the ambassadors of Moctezuma. They didn't expect this reaction. But here, look at this image. Cortés is standing up, much bigger than anyone. It's almost in a frontal position. He is dressed as a pre-Columbian deity nonetheless. He didn't have feathers, like Alessandra Russo noted. And in the second image, he has feathers on top of his hat. The image of him becoming a powerful god, just like Tezcatlipoca in the other picture had feathers. So Cortés has been transformed into a Mesoamerican deity. And what has happened to the Nahua? So here he is. He's been transformed with feathers into this Mesoamerican deity, just like the Ixiptla of Tezcatlipoca was transformed, and everybody, lowers his head because now the god has appeared. And look at, see how in the images, the relationship of size, the Tezcatlipoca is much bigger than the other figures. Even Moctezuma is there with his crown, and he's much smaller than Tezcatlipoca, and he has grown, no? Because he has become that god. So the same happens here with Cortés. He has grown. He's much bigger than the other ones. And what happens to the 5 emissaries that come from these communities that represent Moctezuma, because they are Moctezuma's Ixiptla? Almost 5, it's a very symbolic number because it's the 4 corners of the world and the center. So he has sent 5, meaning he has sent his 5 rulers that represent the territory, no? And look at that position, that of the head on the hand, like a melancholic Christ, that it's a very iconic position in the Passion of Christ, and that the Nahua who are painting these were absolutely familiarized with, because they were trained already in Christian theology, were already Nahua Christian people. And so look at what is happening in these images, the crossing of the Ixiptlas, Cortés becoming a Mesoamerican deity, and Moctezuma through his 5 emissaries becoming Christ. So both are showing their power, but the power of Christianity is very different than the power of the Mesoamerican God. That story of Christ being meek and giving the othership and ready to knowingly sacrifice himself. So that is what Moctezuma has become at the beginning of the story of the conquest. Someone who is willing to sacrifice himself so that Christ, who will be the next important deity at the center of the world, that in New Spain it was Christ equated to the sun, Moctezuma will make him come into this world through his own sacrifice. That is what this image, just these 5 images are telling you. Then These descriptions are amazing. The shots and how the emissaries with that sound of thunder got really, really shocked, and the way it is smoked and it smelled. And so everything is captured in these images. And then how after that, that fright and being them put as prisoners and show the power of these new gods, they started, you can almost hear them, come on, don't be so, weak, come on and enjoy our bread, our wine. And they test all of these. And after that, they are rowing with such haste to go and tell Moctezuma of what has happened. And they are, those bodies are almost decomposing, they are not all together. Look at how different is one image to the other and how expressive all of this is. And what happened next in chapter 6 is that Moctezuma, when hearing of these stories, he says, we need to do this ritual to sacrifice this victim and give this to the gods so I can see what will befall. It is a vision quest. It's a ritual to see the future. And here it is, here is what he says. What will now befall us? Who stands in command? My heart is tormented as if washed with chilly water. Imagine a heart washed with chilly water, how it would shrink, no? Where in truth may we go? He is aware that something terrible will happen. So this is how the text and the images get together. So now Moctezuma is in his palace, and you see him pointing at that serpent. And I always thought that serpent must have been Quetzalcoatl, because we think of the coming of the Spaniards as the coming of Quetzalcoatl. But no, this serpent relates to a Mesoamerican tradition called the vision quest. So after the sacrifice, Moctezuma now will have a clear vision. And what is happening here is that everything that they are describing to Moctezuma, that his emissaries were sent and were spying on the Spanish army coming into Mexico City, everything that will be described to him, he will see it as a vision. And as you can see on the image above, the serpent is the man pointing at what he's looking, and it's the Spanish army. And it's a different style. It is the style of the vision. So Moctezuma is having this vision of them coming into Tenochtitlan far before it happened. Here is what I am saying. It's a revelation. And this is what it says. This goes with the text. And when the shot struck a mountain, it was as if it was destroyed, dissolved, and a tree was pulverized. It was as if it vanished. The mountain and the tree are two images of the mountain is the mountain of creation, is the whole earth, and the tree is the cosmic tree that sustains the heaven. So when the shots destroy a mountain and dissolve the tree, that is how the texts are describing the vision that Moctezuma is having of what will befall them with this Spanish army advancing. Also, this description, their bodies were covered everywhere. Only their faces appear. They were very white. They had chalky faces. They had yellow hair, some black hair. Long were their beards. So this is really words of the first impressions that are so dear. Imagine reading these today. And this is the vision quest trajectory. So these are the lintels 24 and 25 in Yaxchilan. I really give thanks for this to Alice, who you all just met, because Lady Chalk, who is the queen of Yaxchilan, is doing a self-sacrifice by passing a rope through her tongue. And when she's doing this, the pain that this causes creates in her the vision. It's almost like how this painful experience, it's just like taking an hallucinogenous plant, and the serpent appears, and it appears in the shape of a warrior in war. So it is very similar, this, to what Moctezuma did with the serpent and the captive. So now we go to chapter 16, and Moctezuma arrives into Xoloco at the avenue of Iztapalapa, and it's ready, really ready to enter for the first time Tenochtitlan. So let's look at this image carefully. For only one time in this image, Cortés has no beard. Malinche, Malintzin, Marina is central in this image. She's a little taller than every single one. She's in a frontal position. Remember the Xiptla. She's an Xiptla in this. And then Moctezuma. Moctezuma now has a beard. And he's communicating through Malinche. And this is the first encounter between these two leaders. Remember that Moctezuma represents the axis mundi, the center of time and space. Any king in the pre-Columbian Americas, in Mesoamerica, was that. A king meant, just as King Charles V was the representative of God, Moctezuma was the representative of Xutecutli, and he was at the center of time and space. And here we have Malinche dressed as the Xiptla of the earth. Look at her. She has this cross in her chest that is the cross of the territory of the four corners of the earth as territory. She is also, she has, her skirt is drawn with how the fertile earth rhomboidal figures is, that fertile earth that is also blood, just as the Coatlicue statue shows in this one. So she's like a pillar, like Coatlicue. She is the earth goddess. And here you see what it's been said. So first, Moctezuma receives Cortés and says, "My lord, you have suffered fatigue. You have come to arrive on earth. You have come to govern your city of Mexico." And Cortés replied, "Let Moctezuma put his heart at ease. Let him not be frightened. We love him much." And in that moment, thereupon, the Spaniards grasped Moctezuma by hand. When Moctezuma was made captive, the other rulers that are with him got really angry and abandoned him. So this is the chapter. So this is how the communication is happening. So it is so important that Moctezuma is saying this, but actually Moctezuma seems to be talking actually to heaven. Cortés is really talking through Malinche to Moctezuma, but Moctezuma is actually talking to the heavens. Look at the finger pointing up. Look at his bearded countenance. Look, this is another way of saying again that Moctezuma is the representative of Christ, and that this is, in this saga, this is another stage in the passion of Moctezuma as Jesus Christ. This is again another. So Moctezuma is in that moment taken prisoner, betrayed, completely betrayed, because he offered him to come to your city, and what he does is betrayed Moctezuma immediately, and Moctezuma is sent to his childhood palace, and here he is, not in the palace of the king, but in his house, in his princely house. And again, look how Moctezuma is the Xitla now of the behold the man, of the Ecce Uomo. It's again another stage in the passion of Christ, getting ready to his sacrifice, just as Christ was getting ready. So Moctezuma made possible that this image of creation happens. On your right side, you have a plaque now in the Dallas Art Museum. Today, you can see it in Mixpantli, that has the image of the creation of the world and the foundation of a city in the image of the creation of the world. So it is a city that begins an era, a sun, in Olmec times around 900 AD. You see the first 3 stones of creation. Then you see a sea-like form, that it's the cave of the mountain. Then you see the mountain like a pyramid. On top of the mountain, you see the first cosmic tree, a maize plant with the 4 corners of the world, those 4 dots around it, and the heavens with the cross of the heavens and the feathers. All of this is happening in the primeval waters of creation, represented by the jade, that is crystallized water. And if you can see in the shape of the square, you can see the 8 partitions of cosmos, 4 rectangles, 4 rectangular forms, the east, the west, the north, the south, and the corners, which are the solstices, where the sun goes in the winter to the winter solstice to the south, and then goes back to the north at the summer solstice, and that creates the year. So you have the 8 partitions of cosmos joining space, the territory, the 4 corners of the world, with time, the sun around the 4 corners of the world, creating the solstices, and with that, the seasons. So how this is translated into an image with a European style, this is how they did it. This is the coast of Veracruz. This is just a close-up to the coast. So you are actually seeing just a little piece of the whole sacred waters earth. But in that, you can see that in the middle, there's a tree that didn't have to be there. It's a tree that is super big if you compare it with the little houses around it. Then to the right, you see a mountain, a rounded, very much rounded mountain, and Malinche, Cortés are there. So this is the first mountain of creation, or the first Altepetl water mountain, sacred water mountain. And then you have the primeval waters right there. And instead of the heavens like that, you have the rainbow that has connotations for Mesoamericans, but that has a very particular way of understanding in the Bible as a covenant of a new world not going to be destroyed anymore. So this is the new era with a new covenant, where all the things that are brought by the Spaniards in their boats are here. All of the new things, the animals, a cow, sheep, a dog. Then the musketeers, the gunpowder, the horses, and another very important novelty, a man sitting down and writing in alphabetic writing. All of this is brought to the new world, but there is Malinche, an indigenous man, and the Spaniards. So this is a world already constituted by 2 different ethnicities. And that world that is told in the Conquest in the Florentine Codex really was inherited by many peoples in Mexico. And And as a proof of this, you have the genealogy of the Familia Mendoza Moctezuma. And here you have the Count Mendoza Moctezuma telling everyone, I am the descendant of all these kings. And how are the kings drawn? They are exactly drawn with the face of Christ, just as Moctezuma had acquired and just as Moctezuma had permitted. He joined Christ with the indigenous nobility. And in that way, the Christianity of the New World was an indigenous Christianity. And this is how the images of the conquest tell an alternative story from that of the conquered conquistadors, but really someone who is thinking of from a much larger point of view. This is cosmic history, and this is understanding how the cosmos works and how the forces of creation need to be united and create another world, a world that for sure is made by two different ethnicities, one in power, the other not in power, but a world that is created by cosmic history. And so that is, I think, a very important act of resilience, of cultural resiliency.